Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
Welcome to this week's episode of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. I'm Mike, your host, a human solutions consultant here in Seattle, Washington. On today's show, we're going to be talking with Reverend Dr. Mark Heilshorn out of Connecticut, and we're going to talk a little bit about the human need for spiritual growth. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the complexities of language and how it's complicated our ability to read body language and or facial expressions. And then we are going to have the question of the day, which is, why is inclusion so difficult? So stick around, be right back with Dr. Reverend Mark Heilshorn. Thank you for joining us today on What Drives You, the interview. Today we are talking with Reverend Dr. Mark Heilshorn out of Connecticut. Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
Hey, Mike. How are you? Happy to be here.
Great. How's the weather out there in Connecticut?
A little cloudy and overcast and cold. It's middle of March, just what we expect this time of year.
Oh, yeah? We are wonderfully sunny today, which is an odd sort of thing for Seattle.
Well, you just moved it over here, that's all.
Yeah, maybe that what it was. So why don't you tell us real quick a little bit about yourself? I mentioned you were in Connecticut to give us a little bit more information, and I know you do a podcast, so you probably want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Well, I'm an ordained pastor in the United Church of Christ, known as the Congregational Church in these parts. I haven't served the church for about 13 years. I have to qualify that. But ordained nevertheless, and I have a doctoral degree in theology. I live in Newtown, Connecticut, and I have a practice of massage therapy and an equine body work therapy practice here in Westport, Connecticut. My podcast is, you can find me on Reclaim the Spirit, and that's found on Facebook. And what drives me is the search for the soul. What does it mean to be a soulful people?
Mm-hmm. Would you say that's your passion?
It's becoming my passion. I have to say it's been an evolution. My life is sort of a patchwork quilt of a lot of cool experiences that have brought me to this place. And I think what people are looking for, myself included, is finding growth and finding out what it means to be human in this spiritual body that we're all born with.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote, and I can't recall the exact wording, but it's you're not a body with a soul, you're a soul with a body, right?
Pretty clear. I think we're born, we are spiritual beings first, and living a human experience. And I think we're all born divine, and we're all trying to figure out how to get to that spiritual place of subconsciously and unconsciously what it means to be a servant in this world, and to really identify with what is spoken of in a lot of spiritual texts of loving others as we love ourselves. And it's very hard to do in a culture we're scattered around like pinballs, with all kinds of fear-based ideologies and restlessness and, lack of a better term, the resentments that we hold dear that prevent us from really seeing the divinity in each other.
Yeah, that's a interesting way you put that, because as we talked a little bit before this, is that you've done a lot of research on other religions, and I have as well, and there's a lot of common tenets in most religious organizations or philosophies that basically urge us to get away from our basic human drives, and that's the animal parts of our being, which is selfishness and survival, right?
Yep. Self-centeredness, I think, is the key piece that this culture loves to be attracted to, because let's face it, it represents what I call the lower glass of the hourglass. It's where we swim in all the stuff that the world loves and that our ego loves. You know, we're actually ravenous when it comes to greed and control and
Hmm.
competition and all of these things that encourage us to sort of be egomaniacs and want and want and want. And it's a real hard journey to get up through that little gap between the bottom and the top. And once you get through there, and I think the only thing that really gets us through there is the love that we have for one another, the love that we have for ourselves, frankly. And it's very hard to love yourself in a culture that's so preoccupied um, with the distractions of getting and getting and getting. And you know, the bigger the better, the more that we can consume. I mean, we are in a consumeristic culture.
Yes.
I love what we have and I hate what we have.
Yeah, I know.
It prevents us from getting up there into that place of love and compassion and kindness and gentleness and fortitude and strength and purpose. I mean, it's hard to stay swimming up there without getting sucked down to the bottom. Um, and our job, I think my job, especially now that I see myself in this light, is to help people get to that place. And it's a yeoman journey, but it's very satisfying once you're able to connect with somebody and help them understand that when they connect to God or their sense of mantra or their sense of religion or their sense of spirituality, they can pop through and stay up there. But it takes some work.
Yeah, I think you're correct. You know, it's a often a lifetime. It's a craft. It's craftsmanship rather than expertise or winning a trophy or something. You know, you have to continually work at it.
Yeah, and we're not a culture that loves to work at that kind of stuff. You know, it comes a little too hard, and or at least the perception is that it's hard, and
Yeah.
it's not. You know, it's not an easy win, right? So to speak. It comes with its own set of lumps and ups and downs, and but I think it's a gradual kind of rise if you're really going to set your intentions correctly and want to embrace what it means to be spiritually alive and what I would say awake.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, um, you mentioned equine. I'm going to pop
Yeah,
over to that real quick.
sure.
What were you saying about equine therapy?
So the horse world, otherwise known as the equine world, is one that I got interested in a couple of years ago. I started to work on human beings, and that
Hmm.
was fun. But then somebody said to me, "Had you ever worked on horses?" And I thought, "Geez, not really." But I've always loved horses, so let's give it a go. So I'm certified in what's called the Masterson Method, which is a Jim Masterson's a practitioner out in Iowa, and he created a method. And I guess the best way to describe it is we come up with all these techniques to relax a horse
Right.
so that they can help identify with their stress and their anxiety, which they all have.
Yep.
Um, and help them help themselves. And horses are prey animals. They're always thinking that something's after them. So they're designed to ignore whatever pain and stress and anxiety they have. But if you can get them to relax, then they can let go of their own stress and tension. And I just find them to be incredibly soulful animals. And when you help an animal like that, it is the most exhilarating experience in the world. Um, and you can watch them literally peel off their layers of stress and anxiety when you go through these techniques. And so I work both on people to help relieve their pain and their stress and heal them, as well as horses.
Okay. Yeah. The reason why I bring that up is that I worked in equine therapy
Oh, okay.
for a while, and I worked on a ranch where we used equine therapy for uh, students, male students with addiction problems. So
Sure.
did
Yep.
that for many years, and there was a lot of training involved about uh, how horses and people interact as that. So I found that very interesting. So thank you for
Right. It's
sharing
great
that.
therapy. I'm involved with something called the Equus effect, which does that for PTSD. Lots of guys that come back from our various conflicts overseas, have a tough time adjusting to life, and they come to the farm to work with horses and finally identify with their own pain.
Yes.
And can kind of clean up their side of the street with the horse's help.
Yes, it's amazing to see somebody connect with an animal and how each of them impresses upon the other one their own projections of pain. It's really interesting.
Well, and you would know that a horse can evaluate us in 2 seconds.
Yes.
They know very quickly whether we're on the beam or off the beam.
Yes, I have seen that, and I've experienced it personally when I was when I was not in a good mood to being around horses, and they're skittish and
you won't let us touch them.
Yeah, they don't want to have anything to do with you. So
no,
it's
they have X-ray vision. They can scan our souls in 2 seconds. It's really funny, kind of fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that, and let's get back. So in your pursuit of this goal or this passion of yours, what's your goal, I guess?
Okay, so my goal, if I have a reclaim the spirit, is my contention, frankly, and I knew this as a minister when I was in the church as well and out of it, is that we are kind of spiritually anemic as a population.
Okay.
Let's face it, religion has kind of got a bad name, and the churches haven't necessarily created, all churches really have not helped themselves in teaching gentleness and kindness. In general, I think they've done a reasonably good job, but the media and a lot of the failure of the church leadership has created a bad name.
Yeah,
so I think
it's an adoption of a culture rather than a practice.
Exactly. So, and I think that, I'm speaking from my own experience, the church has become very transactional. It's a business. It's not necessarily a place where you can find your own spiritual center as much as maybe former generations did. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. Anyway, my point is the population in general is less biblically / spiritually centered. And so consequently, things like loving your neighbor, caring for one another, really listening to the needs of other people and supporting them and loving other people, it's a really hard concept for us. And just take the concept of sacredness, right? If you looked at other indigenous cultures, the concept of a sacred land or a sacred item or a sacred experience is central to their way of living. Take any American Indian reservation, and you'll find that their understanding of the sacred is so much broader and bigger than any of us. I can't think of one thing in my life that I would say, oh, this is sacred to me. I have to hold on to it in my life. And if I know that if I hold on to it, it's going to help be like a portal to my understanding of spirit or my understanding of soul or my understanding of God.
Right.
That's missing. That's completely missing in our vernacular, if you will, as a culture. And so I want to be able to help people find the sacred, find the spiritual, and reclaim what it means to be centered and connected to their sense of God, whatever that may be. And that could be a natural God. That could be the God of the Bible. That could be Buddhism. That could be Taoism and Taoism. That could be all kinds of things. But I feel like there's a hunger and a divine, everybody's born in this divine capsule, but we don't know what to do with it. So I want to help people find that and find that through their own exploration of their lives and what it means to be valuable, what it means to have purpose in their lives, and whether they're living their lives at a soulful level or not.
All right. Well, that's very well said. That's about all the time we have for today. So where can people find you?
Great. So they can find me on Facebook at Reclaiming the Spirit. Just have to type that in and you'll find my podcast. I've got a number of podcasts that I've done over the course of the last year. I'm about ready to launch into doing a bunch more. But it's been, there are 10, 15-minute podcasts, and I also am very willing and have created a business model out of helping people really understand what it means to reclaim their spirit, and offer packages and ways to meet with them and counsel with them in order to find that within themselves.
Well, perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today, Mark. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our main segment, but I appreciate you coming on.
All right, Mike. Thanks very much. Good to talk with you.
You
Be well.
too. There's something that humans have that no other creature has. Now, we know that other animals have the ability to communicate with each other, but nothing as complex as the language that we use. And if you are listening to me right now, you might not really understand how complex this is. I'm making vocalizations with my voice that we have a shared understanding of, hopefully, and we can convey messages, ideas, concepts through this form of verbal auditory communication. And it is by far one of the most fascinating pieces of human behavior. I've talked a little bit about the power of words and the meanings that we attach to it and things like that. But the ability to verbalize complex ideas is something that as of yet we know no other creature can do. At least we don't know that yet. At any rate, one of the interesting things about this is that as we have created this complex ability to convey ideas, we have also seemed to lost the ability to pay attention to something else. And that would be the physical manifestations of what is going on with our bodies. And I'm talking specifically here about reading facial expressions and body language as it occurs during a conversation. And it's interesting to note that I don't think we really think about that a lot. But there are times when we are speaking with somebody and we get to feelings. We sort of intuit things that are not right or don't feel right because our unconscious brain is picking up on these signals and decoding them. But because our unconscious is doing it and not our consciousness, which is paying attention to the words, we are losing out on some of that communication. And that is a fascinating thing, that we are paying so much attention to the words that are, or the concepts and ideas that the words are giving us, that we lose out on other things. And then, not less importantly, a lot of times when we are speaking with each other and using this complex language to convey ideas back and forth, we're actually anticipating things that are going to be coming out of the other person's mouth. We are also anticipating solving problems. So we don't do another thing, which is called listening. Why is this important? Well, it's important because when we are doing that, we are paying more attention to the words. We're trying to come up with responses, and we aren't connecting with that other human on a more deeper level. When we can understand, or when we can see the emotional responses that are going on somebody's face or in their body while they're speaking, that's where empathy comes from. We also hear it in tone of voice, in pitch, in meter. A lot of different subverbal and nonverbal things are communicating with us that we're picking up on. And when we stop trying to anticipate what we're going to say next, or how we're going to solve a problem, or whatever it is we're going to be doing as soon as the person stops talking, or looking for those break-in points where we can start talking, and we start paying attention to how the words are being used and things like that, and really listen, that is where we obtain a very powerful empathetic connection. And people can pick up when we are listening or not. People unconsciously or consciously understand when we are fully present and paying attention to them. That is the power of listening. And it's a difficult skill for at least those of us in the Western world. I'm not going to make blanket statements about everybody, but culture and personality do play into all these things, as I've mentioned before. But we tend to want to not listen to the other person. And, you know, there's a lot of monikers, not monikers. There's a lot of point outs to this in different areas. I think in Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the things he said is first seek to understand before you seek to be understood. I think there's something in highly effective habits of highly effective people, 7 habits of highly effective people, Stephen Covey. That's very similar. And we also have little idioms like we have one mouth and 2 ears, you know, the sort of reminder that we need to pay attention more. And that is important, because the thing that I mentioned earlier is that language is the complexities of language is such a part of our being that we focus more on that than we do on anything else. And that's how a lot of times we get away with lying, or we don't detect when people are lying, because we not only do we hear the words that are being spoken to us, we want to believe them. And we want that because that's that acceptance thing coming in. We want to accept and be accepted by each other. So when somebody is telling us a falsehood, we want to believe them. Most of the time. There are other factors, of course, that contradict that. Some people are raised in environments where you can't trust anybody, so they never trust what's coming out of somebody's mouth, right? And consequently, they actually pick up on that human behavior, the nonverbals, better than somebody who is more trusting of somebody's words, which is an interesting thing. And there's also a sex difference here too, between typical, and again, these are more often seen in these groups than the blanket statement that it sounds like it is. Males tend to be less obvious or less conscious of the subtleties of body language, facial expressions, things like that, than females. Females tend to pick up on body language cues better. And then, of course, we can talk about the overstimulation of the senses for persons that have autism and other neurological or neurodiverse ways of thinking. So this is one of those adaptive measures that humans have that have decreased our ability to do other things. And it's not that we can't learn this stuff, but it's very difficult to apply it in the time frame, right? So what am I trying to say here? I don't really know. Yeah, I'm just talking about the complexities of language, and if you can shut your brain off a little bit more instead of trying to anticipate what you're going to say. You can see a lot more, you can hear a lot more, you can and have a better understanding of what that person is talking about. And if you are somebody who works in the social services field or the psychology field, that's super important. It's even important when you don't work in there, but we tend to compartmentalize these sort of concepts in these industries. So if you work in the psychology field, you're expected to know how to listen. You're expected to have empathy if you work in the social service field, and not so much when you're working in construction or whatever. But these are all interpersonal skills that in any situation can make understanding a lot better, especially in interpersonal relationships. I guess my call to action here in this program today is to take that step back. I talk about taking a step back a lot. Take a step back and just shut off your need to respond and simply just hear what the person is saying and how that person is saying it and what's going on in their person while they're saying it. And you learn a great deal more than when you just focus on the words. And again, concept here is a lot more difficult to perform than it is to understand, right? Like everything that I talk about, there's a lot more complexity to this than I can really convey, even using this complex skill called language. So that's my thing today. That's the topic. Practice is how you do that. It helps if you have a coach or somebody who can kind of reel you in when you are not paying attention, because again, we run programs and we have habits that we follow and things that we do normally and naturally that we don't actually think about until somebody points it out. So anyway, that's the main topic for today. Stick with us. We'll be right back where we talk about inclusion, which is a big thing in the workplace and organizations, and why it's so difficult. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. Inclusion is a I hazard to say a buzzword, but that's what it's becoming is a buzzword in a lot of organizational trainings and a lot of media pieces, right? So, and what we're talking about is inclusive workplaces, inclusive societies, inclusive cultures. Now, the question today is, why is that so difficult for us? And it's difficult for us because naturally we are exclusive as people. We tend to be drawn to people who are like us. And when we draw and are drawn to people that are like us, we tend to try and exclude people who are not like us. That's where this conflict begins in a very, very natural arena. Okay. I'm not trying to excuse this. I'm just trying to expose this idea. This is where we get the term unconscious bias. We are unconsciously drawn to those people that we are similar to. And this is not just based on physical features. Given anything else, there's a lot of other factors that go into this. For instance, for those of you who are in the military, the priority is not color. The priority is not gender. The priority is rank. Rank is super important to the military profession, and that is one of the highest levels of choosing sameness that you can get in a military group. You always, because it's drilled into you. The highest rank is the leader. The highest rank is the leader. Officers do not fraternize with non-officers. It's a cultural priority. And that's where we get some of these other ones. Naturally, if we take all of this stuff out of the mix, we are naturally going to look for differences because we view differences as dangerous. And we are going to look for similarities as sameness is safe. And that's how we process, or how our brain heuristically processes things. So we are given, again, a lot of this cultural, I'm having trouble with words today. All this cultural ambiguities and value systems. If we take all that stuff away, we're going to focus on the things that we see first. So if we are a different shade, a different eye color, different hair color, we will tend to process those through that little system. And then we will talk to each other. And then based on how we can communicate with each other, we start building up common ground. And when we can build common ground, that's where we get cohesion and collaboration and things like that. If you notice, anytime there's a conflict in our world or in our personal lives and our work lives, it's basically because of differences, right? We don't often have conflict around sameness. It's around difference. And that's what drives this kind of thing, is this need for sameness in our lives. And okay, so what does that do for us? Well, it's one of the things that affects our cultural outlooks, which is one of the things that creates these problems with racism and genderism and sexism and ageism and all these other isms that we talk about all the time. So when we say we need an inclusive environment, we are saying on a conscious level that we need to bring all these differences in, when our natural inclination is to push them away. And if you think about it, it's a little bit of a trap too. Like in the military, it's based on the priority of values. So whatever the values that culture prioritizes, it's going to find people that fit within those values, and it's going to exclude people that don't fit within those values. So when you say we want a more inclusive environment, you have to understand how to define what that means. Because in every single group, we are including sameness, or whatever we prioritize as sameness, over excluding differences. And we do it in every single aspect. You can't, you're not going to see a lot of people in groups who are diametrically opposed to what the group stands for, because we just don't, it just doesn't work that way. It creates problems, conflicts, and everything like that. So we are constantly trying to exclude somebody. And that's why this idea is difficult. I'm not saying impossible, and I'm definitely not saying it's not unnecessary, because it's definitely necessary, because we have to get over these ideas that just because you look a certain way means you are not acceptable to whoever is doing the looking. And that flows every direction. So it's a very simple concept, but it's very complex in action. So that question was given to me by a person that commented on something that I said on a couple of episodes ago. So that's why it's difficult. It's difficult because from a very natural place, we are exclusive. And so when we talk about inclusive environments, we really have to understand what it is we are trying to prioritize, because when we are prioritizing, that's what creates the culture. And the culture is created by the leaders of the group. So it always comes down to a top-down flow of what is acceptable to a group and what is not acceptable to a group. And we've seen a lot of that over the last several years. And I don't even need to get into it because I'm sure you can figure that out on your own. That's the question of the day. If you have questions, comments, or anything, please send me a note. Send me an email at mike@whatdrivesyou.net. I am always happy to try and answer questions about human behavior. I'm always trying to, I'm trying to figure this out on my own as well. You know, it doesn't mean I'm always correct. It just means that we're looking for common ground. So thank you very much. Have a great week. I hope you enjoyed today's show. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.